This is the Terracotta Army. 8,000 warriors buried over 2,000 years ago. One of the greatest wonders of the world.
Every year, millions of people walk to the edge of those pits in Xi'an and look down at rows of clay soldiers, convinced they understand exactly what they're looking at. They don't. When explorer Albert Lin was finally granted access to scan beneath the Terracotta Army with equipment no foreign researcher had ever been allowed to bring to the site, the data didn't confirm a tomb. It confirmed something else entirely. Buried directly underneath the soldiers everyone assumes are the whole story. The clay army isn't standing guard over an emperor's rest. It's standing on top of something the emperor needed the entire world to never find. Before we get into what Lin's scanners actually picked up, hit like and subscribe, because once you understand what's underneath those soldiers, you'll never look at a museum photo of them the same way again. Most visitors fixate entirely on the warriors. 8,000 individual clay figures, each with a distinct face, arranged in tight military formation across pits that stretch far wider than most tourists ever realize. But researchers who have studied the broader layout of this complex have known for years that the visible pits are only the entrance. The full underground footprint covers an area measured in square miles, not acres. The accepted explanation has always been straightforward. The first emperor of a unified China wasn't just building a tomb. He was building a complete underground replica of his empire, so that if his dynasty ever fell in the world above, his spirit would rule an identical one below, permanent and entirely under his control. That's why the complex includes clay stables, functional bronze tools, sculpted birds, and reproductions of farm equipment. Every detail of daily administration recreated in fired clay, so the emperor would never lack for anything. But there's a documented detail the standard tour skips over almost entirely. This emperor didn't only prepare for death. For decades, he actively tried to avoid it. Historical records confirm he sent expedition after expedition across the known world in search of an immortality elixir, consulting mystics and alchemists, consuming substances his own advisors promised would extend his life indefinitely. When every search came back empty-handed, some scholars believe his ambitions didn't stop. They believed the tomb itself became the backup plan. Not simply a resting place, but a ritual mechanism engineered to pull a soul back across the line between death and life. Every soldier positioned, every detail placed with intention. The army doesn't face a random direction. It faces east, toward the territories of the enemies he spent his life conquering. Even in death, positioned for the next war. That's the story on the surface. What Albert Lin found underneath it is where this stops being folklore. Getting anywhere near the restricted zones of this site has been effectively impossible for decades. Drone flights were banned outright over the entire complex. Every scan required sign-off from the highest levels of government oversight, and even Chinese researchers with decades of on-site experience routinely worked without a complete picture of what was actually beneath their feet. Information was compartmentalized deliberately, split across teams, so that almost no single person ever held the entire picture. Lin's team works with scanning technology adapted from equipment originally developed for locating buried objects in conflict zones, instruments capable of reading the Earth the way an X-ray reads a body. How he secured permission to bring that equipment into some of the most restricted sections of the site has never been fully explained publicly. From the moment his team arrived, the atmosphere was tightly controlled. Officers monitored every piece of equipment before it was allowed past the perimeter. Every drone flight required a separate, individually approved request. Every scan was conducted with someone standing directly behind the operator watching the readout in real time. Inside the excavated chambers themselves, The effect was disorienting in a way that had nothing to do with temperature or depth. Clay figures stood frozen mid-motion in every direction. Some posed as if a half-second from drawing a weapon, others holding a stillness that felt heavier than aggression. Carriages with structurally intact wheels, stables with horses posed mid-stride, bronze weapons still sharp enough to draw blood after 2,000 years sealed underground. Every pit read like a moment in time that simply never finished. But Lin wasn't there for the art. He was there for what the human eye can't see. Ground-penetrating radar works by firing controlled pulses of energy into the earth. When those pulses strike something solid, a wall, a void, a mass of compressed material, they bounce back and build a picture of what's hidden below, a map made entirely of shadows and echoes. When the first full readouts appeared on the team's screens, the mood shifted immediately. Walls appeared that matched no existing architectural record. Vertical shafts dropped more than 100 feet straight down. And then came the clusters, thousands of small, densely packed shapes that no one on the team could immediately identify. One interpretation offered was almost comforting. Personal possessions, reproduced in permanent materials for the Emperor's use in the next life. But a second, far darker reading of the same data started gaining traction among the researchers reviewing it. What if the equipment wasn't detecting objects at all, but the compacted remains of an entire buried population? As Lin's equipment reached deeper, the underground landscape stopped resembling an organized complex and started resembling something closer to a disturbed, chaotic burial ground. Layer after layer of fractured earth. Shadows with no architectural explanation. This wasn't the tidy afterlife replica the tour guides describe. This looked like the record of something that happened fast and violently. Historical records state that roughly 700,000 people were conscripted to build this complex over decades. For generations, historians assumed the survivors simply went home once construction ended. The scan data suggests a very different explanation. Soil disturbance patterns in several zones matched what forensic geologists call struggle layers. Earth mixed and compressed by bodies in motion, not the slow, even settling of undisturbed ground over centuries. In multiple locations, tunnels appeared to have been sealed from the outside while people were still inside them. If even a fraction of the workforce was entombed on completion, the Terracotta Army isn't merely a monument. It's standing directly above one of the largest concealed mass burial sites in recorded history. There's a detail in the scan data that made this harder for the team to set aside as speculation. In several of the disturbed zones, the radar picked up small clusters of dense, irregular shapes scattered among the fractured soil layers, consistent in size and distribution with human remains rather than construction debris. Forensic archaeologists who reviewed similar readouts from other sites described this exact signature as one of the clearest indicators available through remote sensing alone, short of physical excavation. It doesn't prove what happened, but it narrows the range of explanations considerably, and none of the remaining explanations are comfortable ones. The historical record adds another layer to this. Ancient accounts describe a system where workers considered politically inconvenient, along with dissidents and rivals of the court, were assigned to the construction project under the cover of ordinary national service. Once their usefulness ended, the same accounts suggest, arrangements were made to ensure they never returned home. For centuries, this detail was treated as likely exaggeration, the kind of story that accumulates around any sufficiently ancient and secretive project. The radar data doesn't confirm the story outright, but it stops being easy to dismiss. For the first time in the site's history, Lin's team was permitted to fly scanning equipment above the complex, using LiDAR, a laser-based imaging system capable of cutting through soil and vegetation to map buried structures with precision no ground survey could match. What emerged from that aerial data was a structure that appears in no prior academic publication about the site. A dense, pyramid-shaped mass of compacted earth buried directly beneath the main burial mound, invisible from the surface and undetectable by any method used before Lin's scan. A secret sealed beneath a secret, protected by every layer built above it: soil, clay soldiers, and, if the mass grave interpretation holds, an untold number of the very people who built the complex in the first place. Researchers who reviewed the readout describe the arrangement of the visible pits differently now. The rows of soldiers, long assumed to be ceremonial or defensive in purpose, may function instead as a seal, a deliberate covering, arranged with total precision, to keep attention fixed on the surface while something else stayed hidden beneath it. What sits inside that inner structure remains unconfirmed, but its existence alone rewrites the basic assumption every previous survey of this site was built on, that the visible pits represented the full picture. They don't. They're the outermost layer of something engineered specifically to never be fully seen. None of this emerges from nothing. Chinese archaeologists have publicly acknowledged for years that the excavated pits represent only a fraction of the total burial complex, and official policy has deliberately left the central tomb mound itself unopened, citing preservation concerns. Soil samples taken from around that central mound have long shown mercury concentrations hundreds of times higher than any natural background level, a finding consistent with ancient historical accounts describing engineered rivers of liquid mercury built to simulate the empire's rivers inside the burial chamber. That detail matters here because it confirms something important. These ancient historical accounts, long treated as exaggeration, have held up against modern soil chemistry. If the mercury account turned out to be literal rather than legendary, the accounts describing the scale of the workforce and their fate deserve the same level of serious reconsideration rather than automatic dismissal. Archaeologists working directly on the site have also noted, cautiously and without full public elaboration, that several excavated chambers show damage patterns inconsistent with natural collapse, patterns more consistent with deliberate sealing under duress. This is not a claim invented for this video. It's a documented uncertainty that mainstream Chinese archaeology itself has never fully resolved, largely because the central mound remains sealed and unexamined to this day. So, where does Lin's data actually leave us? It's possible the underlying structures represent nothing more sinister than an elaborate afterlife replica, exactly as the accepted history describes. Personal possessions, functional replicas, no different in spirit from the visible pits above, simply denser and less accessible. It's possible a significant portion of the workforce was indeed left in place at the completion of construction, whether through neglect, catastrophe, or deliberate concealment, making this one of history's largest unmarked burial sites, hiding in plain sight beneath one of its most visited monuments. And it's possible, and this is the reading Lin's team has been most cautious about stating outright, that the inner pyramid structure contains something entirely separate from both explanations, something the emperor considered important enough to bury beneath every other layer of protection his empire could build, and significant enough that 2,000 years of secrecy have still not been enough to bring it into daylight. What's certain, regardless of which explanation eventually holds up, is this. The Terracotta Army was never simply a monument to imperial glory sitting quietly on the surface. It was the visible portion of something engineered from the beginning to keep the world looking up, while everything that actually mattered stayed buried, sealed, and silent beneath the soldiers' feet. If the visible army was built to draw attention away from what's underneath it, what else has history been pointing us toward, so we'd stop looking at what it was actually hiding? That's exactly what we're opening next. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and hit like and subscribe, because some of humanity's greatest secrets may still be buried below.